Are you paying attention right now to what is going on in our world? Because we have major events unfolding, and it feels like the vast majority of my fellow Americans, the herd, as we like to call them, are asleep and don't really even realize what is going on right now in Europe. We have major conflict going on. Escalation is the big issue. And what we need to talk about today, have you heard the latest? President Zelensky will be flying to the United States. We'll be rolling out the red carpet for this hero in the Ukraine. And now we're talking about giving them Patriot missiles. That will mark a major escalation in terms of the military support that we're giving the Ukrainians. Now, look, I'm not saying Vladimir Zelensky is completely evil, but I'm also not going to sit here and say that Vladimir Putin is completely evil either. There are always two sides to every story. And the Russian narrative about what's transpired in the Ukrainian region over the last 10 years is much different than the narrative offered by the West. But what's important here, what we do know for sure, is that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have died during this conflict, and that it's not getting any better. It continues to escalate, and that most Americans, they're asleep, right? Have you noticed? Like, they know more about what's going on in the NFL or Dancing with the Stars than they do what's going on in the Ukrainian region. And now we get from both sides mention of nuclear war, right? That keeps getting brought up. Let's dig in to some of the more recent comments, some of the recent things that have transpired in this conflict, and see if we can make sense of this. And let's pray that it gets resolved in a reasonable manner by both sides of the conflict. Sure, we can get gold to $4,000 and silver to $60 per ounce. But does it really matter when there's people around the world dying? We don't want geopolitical strife to help our precious metals. There's enough other positive factors. But let's just talk about a couple things that Putin has said recently regarding the nuclear threat. He said there's a growing threat of nuclear war. He emphasized that he does not want that. But he said, we will defend our land. We won't take the first strike. And he mentions that the Russians have nuclear weapons that are a little more advanced than what the West has right now. Probably, maybe talking about hypersonic missiles. I don't know for sure. Mr. Putin also brought up the point that the West was the first to bring up anything about nuclear threat, nuclear war. The Russians responded, and he claims, Mr. Putin claims, that when the Russians responded verbally, that's all the Western media focused on, right? Like the West brought it up first. The Russians said, well, we will defend ourselves with nuclear weapons if necessary. And then all the West did was focus on that. Like, whoa, look what he said. Look what he said. Look what he said. Mr. Putin also brought up the point that regarding the criticism for the thousands of mostly drone attacks that have been carried out over the last 2 to 3 weeks on the Ukrainian power infrastructure, he said, yes, we did that. But what nobody brings up is the fact that the Ukrainians have been attacking us as well. They've been attacking our bridge. They attacked the big power lines to the big nuclear plant. They've shut off the water to big regions of the area that are controlled by the Russians. But the West doesn't want to talk about that. All they want to talk about are the attacks. And it sounds like possibly Putin's saying, well, we're doing that in retaliation. I don't know, right? I'm not there. I don't know the details on that. But again, just goes to show there's two sides to every conflict, to every story, and that's what's unfolding here. And the scary part, again, is that it doesn't seem to be moving in a direction which leads to peace and prosperity for everyone, but the converse, leading to more and more conflict. When it comes to the recent deployment of 300,000 troops, it has been mentioned that these guys aren't even winterized, which was kind of laughed at because Russians by their nature are winterized. And it's been brought up that hardly any of those troops have yet to be deployed. And what does the West do? More sanctions, recently announced by the EU against major banks, 200 Russian individuals and companies. It just continues to escalate. And there are big protests right now in Europe against the war, against the sanctions, but those aren't covered in the Western media. All we get are messages of how horrible the Russians are. And that's just one side of the story. Again, I'm not defending them. I'm not saying that there are not horrible things going on over there, but it's two-sided. The people of Europe are struggling with energy prices, which have doubled or tripled since the onset of this conflict. And recently, the Guardian newspaper put out a headline that said this: "Ruble is soaring and Putin is stronger than ever." I think we need to take a step back and look at this whole situation from a more objective, fair-minded perspective. Average people are suffering. Average people are dying because of this conflict. And we can only hope that leaders in the East and the West can look at this situation with a clear mind and a good heart, and that a peaceful resolution can be achieved. Hey, we don't want geopolitical risk to support our price of gold and silver. We do have to look at things through the lens of reality and realize what's going on, accept that this is going on. It'll be interesting how this situation plays out. We will hope for the best, and I'll hope to see you again here in Ron's Basement. Thanks for being here. I'll see you soon.